I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group recently presented a conference in the Tri-Cities entitled Building an Affordable, Green, and Climate-Ready City. This conference was held in response to citizens' concerns over a changing climate, unprecedented levels of development, and the impending loss to the urban tree canopy. So over 100 residents and local elected representatives from the Tri-Cities came out to listen to expert speakers and to participate in breakout groups. The conference was organized by the Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group and funded by Burke Mountain Naturalists and Nature Canada, along with many other supporters. Next up, we're going to have Catherine BERRIS. And Catherine is a registered professional planner and a registered landscape architect who works at the interface of those two disciplines. She is at the urban systems and spends most of her time these days working on parks, trees, and cemeteries, trying to give everyone, living or not, a healthy and beautiful place to be. So Catherine is a fellow of the Canadian and American Societies of Landscape Architects, which is the highest honor of those organizations. She also co-chairs the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects Committee on Climate and Biodiversity. So please join me in welcoming Catherine.
Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me here today, and advocacy seems to be a part of what I'm doing these days. So here we go. I'm going to try just going like this. Is that okay for a slide change? Okay. So I'm mainly going to talk about the urban forest. I'm going to dig a little bit into some of the details for you to help people really understand some of the challenges and opportunities of trees in our cities. So there are many, many cool quotes about the benefits of trees. This is one that I came across that I quite liked. Oh, go on. Just want to set a bit of the stage that this is an international phenomenon that we're facing, tree loss. So there was a global tree assessment that noted that over the last 300 years, the global forest area decreased by 40%, and that most of that is from human-caused development and land use changes. Also, in terms of benefits, Rocky Mountain Institute is a really great resource for information. Nature's benefits are 9 times the costs, and by 2050, the annual net benefits of urban nature could be $3.1 trillion per year. Obviously, you know all this, but sometimes it's nice to have some touch points in terms of information. There are many other international tree organizations and efforts going on. This is one example. We worked on an urban forest strategy for City of Surrey, and using a program called iTree Eco, which actually involves 200 sites, sample sites, and a tree inventory of each. It will calculate the benefits for you based on the species and sizes and condition of the trees in the city. And so you can see from this, it can be converted into huge monetary values into the ecosystem services that trees provide through all the different carbon sequestration, all the way down to stormwater management. So lots of data available to help us work with the forces that be, that to help them understand why trees are so important. Okay. I think that this group has done quite a lot of investigation on the tree canopy in Metro Vancouver. So just a bit of context here for maybe those who aren't as familiar. Metro Vancouver has done some great studies and has calculated that as of 2020, which was the last time it was measured, the average tree canopy, or the overall tree canopy of the urban containment boundary in Metro Vancouver, was 31%, and this is excluding agricultural areas and large parks. So this is just within the developed part of all the municipalities. The projection was that with current practices carrying on and no change, that the canopy would decline to 29%. I believe that's by 2050, which is the time frame of the latest regional plan. And so they set a target of 40% tree canopy for the entire Metro Vancouver. So just carry on. So I'm gonna switch from here. I'm gonna come back to talking about tree canopy later on. But many municipalities are doing urban forest strategies. Some of the benefits of this are it's a great tool for raising awareness. The community engagement is wonderful and helps municipalities realize how much people care about trees, which is usually what comes out loud and clear. And the strategies can help these communities improve their tree protection policies and practices. Some of the challenges, even though that many municipalities have urban forest strategies, the tree canopy is still declining. Tree canopy, just in case anyone doesn't know, is the extent of tree cover as measured from above. So it's still happening, it's still declining. One challenge, I believe, is unrealistic tree canopy targets. So for that Metro Vancouver example, there was a study on potential planting areas, but I feel that study actually didn't have the level of detail it needed to truly understand tree planting opportunities. And there's something about setting a target that's unrealistic, I think helps, I don't know, it's harder for municipalities to implement it if it feels like they'll never achieve it. So I think that's one of the challenges we have. Implementation in cities is very siloed. So the people in charge of tree canopy are most often within the Parks Department, but it's amazing when you go into the municipalities. So development planners aren't really thinking about trees. Engineering departments who are working on all kinds of projects throughout cities, they're not really thinking about trees. And there's just a lack of communication and integration among cities when it comes to trees. They're falling into proverbial cracks. Bills 44 and 47, provincial legislation promoting housing density in the name of affordability has done a lot of, made it much more challenging to get trees in more areas because the legislation speaks about targets for density, but it doesn't say anything about all the other factors that make a good and a healthy community. So let's look a little bit more at trees in cities, and I'm gonna dig down here. Okay, everyone knows that trees need nutrients, they need access to sunlight, they need water, and they need air. So this is common knowledge. It gets really challenging in urban environments to achieve that. Now, this is a famous diagram by a landscape architect named James Urban in the US, who calculated how much soil or growing medium you need to grow a healthy tree in the city. And the amount of soil increases in relation to the size of the tree. So in general, to get a large, healthy tree in the city, you need 20 cubic meters of growing medium, and that is challenging in many situations. Next slide. Because in our urban environments, we have highly compacted soil, we have a lot of poor quality soil, we have many impermeable surfaces, and I mean, this diagram just gives a sense of the network of utilities below ground, especially when we get into our downtown areas. It makes it really, really difficult to squeeze in trees. Also, we know that large existing trees have way more biodiversity value than the little small trees that we have to plant because you can't plant a huge tree. And so they require a lot of space. So sometimes people say it's the drip line of the tree. The actual arborist best practice is that the critical root zone for every tree is a radius of the diameter at breast height times 18. So translating that into numbers, that means for a trunk of 300 millimeters, which is about a foot, you need a diameter of 10 meters or more than 30 feet to adequately protect that tree, which of course makes it really, really challenging. Often the greatest opportunities are along rear property lines because sometimes those are more the garden spaces. I'm thinking more of single-family developments here. Just want to give you an example from a colleague of mine about how this environment is changing. So he works for a municipality in Metro Vancouver, and his role is to review development applications in relation to how they affect trees. So he cites an example of a laneway house where there's a large tree. And he calculated that if you shift the laneway house over just a tiny bit and put the foundation on helical piles instead of poured concrete, that it would be possible to save that tree, a large existing tree. A few years ago, he was able to do that, and often council was receptive and voted to make that adjustment to save the tree. These days, they are not receptive. And so it's just a tiny example of we're dealing with a political climate in many municipalities where there just isn't the initiative, or it's not a big agenda item to try to save trees. And I love the previous speakers talking about land use, how much land use affects our health, and this is just one tiny example of that. So we end up with a lot of unhealthy trees in urban settings just because of these challenges. These trees on the left, this is a midsummer photo, and they're not doing well. They're not going to have a long lifespan. Next one. And we see lots of situations like this where trees have outgrown their locations and are not thriving. So let's look at how we plant trees in dense urban environments. It's great in parks. There's lots of space for trees and some other large urban areas. But when you get into a downtown situation and you're dealing with sidewalks and roads and even active transportation, bike lanes, all the rest, it's really hard to get that growing medium. So there are two methods that are typically used. The one on the left is showing you an example of structural soil. So what this is large angular rocks with voids in between them. So the good growing the large angular rocks provide a solid base for paving above, and the voids between have space with good soil in them for the tree roots to grow. So this is a good technique to use. However, you need a much larger area to accommodate the tree because there's so much less soil per unit area. The example on the right is soil cells. Now, this is for the most dense urban environments where you're talking typically downtown type streets. These are a plastic grid that's very strong that supports the paving, and the soil goes inside and enables the trees to be planted. It's often what you're seeing in downtown areas and sidewalks and things like that, and the trees will do well with that environment, with that method. Next slide. Here's just an example of a drawing where soil cells are the black rectangular areas on the bottom part of this street at the intersection, and then the pink hatches are structural soil, and you see in comparison how much more structural soil you need underneath than the soil cells. However, next slide. Looking at the relative costs of these methods, and these are highly ballpark average costs, but compared to each other, a tree in a park, about $1,000 to get a good-sized tree planted with soil, structural soil, about $6,000 per tree, and tree in a soil cell, $15,000 per tree. Now, this is relative to the value of land, the intensity of development. You're also looking at much more expensive paving materials and everything else in these downtown areas. But it just helps it helps to realize what's involved in establishing trees in an urban setting, that it's not just space, but it's quite expensive. In the work we've been doing with urban forest strategies, we often end up seeing this. So we have residents, we have developers, we have the city, and everyone says, it's really hard for me to plant trees, you should all be doing it. And that's the situation. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. Next slide. So I'm going to start merging into the opportunities. This is a table. I'm not expecting you to read it, but it was from a an urban forest strategy we're working on right now. It happens to be in Colwood. And we are looking at where can we plant trees to enable the city to at least retain their canopy or perhaps even increase it. The answer to the previous slide is everyone has to plant trees. The city has to plant, developers have to plant, and residents have to plant if we are going to, like I said, either retain or increase our tree canopies and not have them consistently declining. We have to look at trees, how to get them into our older neighborhoods, how to get them into new developments, and then how to get them into city land. And that includes parks, road corridors, and city facilities. Now I'm ready. So in the older neighborhoods, there's no legislation that requires a property owner to plant trees or even to retain trees. So if you look at, for example, official community plans and zoning bylaws, especially official community plans, there are landscape guidelines for intense housing, like multifamily and other land uses, but not for single-family housing. So really the only authority to help protect or increase tree planting in older neighborhoods is a tree protection bylaw. And these vary a lot across communities, but they are a tool that can be used, as well, of course, as incentives to planting trees. And so over time, we've seen that people generally, infill has been happening on single-family lots. Larger homes are going in than was there before, and trees get removed. There may or may not be a tree protection bylaw to replace those trees. With Bill 44, so I'm going to small-scale multi-unit housing, we tend to refer to it as SMA. There was a regulation that came along with the SMA bylaw that actually said, do not include a landscape architect on your project, with the implication being that it will slow down the approval process. So the BC Society of Landscape Architects got very upset when we read this, and we actually got Ministry of Housing staff to do some workshops with us to talk about this. And they said, absolutely, we believe you need trees in neighborhoods. Absolutely, we know you need permeable soils. And this is a couple years ago now. They told us that, oh yes, they were going to be working on the regulation to include those things. And that the reason they didn't before was because they were under so much pressure to get that bill completed quickly and to get it approved. So we've seen a couple years later that it hasn't changed. It's still the way it was originally. Slide. So as part of the SMA guidelines, they did some studies and they had some diagrams like this that are showing the impact of parking on infill development in neighborhoods. Next one. Planners across BC were doing diagrams like this to try to figure out, for the different lot sizes in different municipalities, what form of development could be put onto that lot. I happened to sit next to the person who was doing it for the company where I work, Urban Systems, and I looked at these and I said, guess what I said? They don't have any trees. How are we going to get trees if people are doing these diagrams and not thinking about trees because of the space they require? So next slide. So through this person and our team, we were able to convince some of our clients that it was important to look at trees as part of these new infill developments. And I just have a few different diagrams here to show you some of these examples with trees, and we calculated the canopy percent. So on the one on the left here was 8% canopy, the one on the right is 10%, I think. Next slide. Here are a couple more different forms of housing, but at least we're showing trees. The key opportunities, if you want to consider trees along with SMA, are increasing height, which sometimes isn't popular, and reducing on-site parking requirements, which at least gives some space. So, for these examples, we're showing trees, but there's no guarantee at all that these trees will be planted, because like I said, there's nothing to absolutely require that as part of the process. Next. I also looked at some high-rise, that's a high-rise example on the left, mid-rise on the right. Borrowed these from a study some colleagues of mine had done for the City of Toronto looking at landscape in relation to these forms of development. And these are relevant to Bill 47 areas, which are the transit-oriented areas, but also, we're seeing this kind of development everywhere. So these two examples are pretty typical. We calculated tree canopy on them for fun. This is benefit of the doubt because we're also measuring the tree canopy where it's overlapping into the road corridor. But you can see 12% on the left, 10% on the right. Like, it's really hard to get many trees into these kinds of projects. Okay, moving on to municipal land, parks. So parks obviously need to have sports fields and playgrounds and courts, especially pickleball, and all kinds of other amenities that preclude trees. But we've done studies for some of our projects where there are often unused spaces around the edges of parks or in between activity areas in parks where it is possible to plant trees. We tend to go a step farther and say, please naturalize these areas and let them become pollinator gardens as well as places that have trees to help with our biodiversity. So certainly that is one place of opportunity. Next slide. The next option for municipalities is roads. So if it's a road with a grass boulevard, it's going to be much easier to plant trees. It's much more difficult if it's an urban setting with either a tiny boulevard or paving or utilities. And typically the tree planting in streets only happens when there's a road construction project because no one wants to go into a road just to plant trees, typically. Next slide. And then we have city facilities. So this was an example a colleague of mine did. It's a parking lot of a recreation center in somewhere in BC. The diagram on the left was the existing parking lot of this recreation center that had a 6% canopy cover. The city had done a master plan and had an 8% canopy cover, or is that 6? Well, from here I'm used to having a monitor. And then she did one on the right where putting trees in the parking lot achieves a 25% canopy. So it's possible, right, to do things with different projects. So on to the recommendations based on all of this. One is consider trees early. So because of the challenges of the space requirements above ground and below ground for any development project, we try to encourage the developers and the municipalities reviewing projects to think about trees from the very, very beginning, which certainly is not typical. There has to be more focus on trees throughout municipalities. Of course, this is related to the political will and situation and the times, but my feeling is that, often there are at least some politicians who do care about this, and if it doesn't happen now, maybe they'll be the government next time around. We have to keep advocating, but there has to be the political will. City departments working together, I said a bit about that earlier, they all have to be coordinated, otherwise the right hand doesn't know what the left is doing. We get called in to help with lots of active transportation projects, for example. They typically aren't thinking about trees. We come in and we say, hey, there's an opportunity here. Achievable targets. So I think it helps to have achievable targets. I also think it helps to have targets for the pieces rather than just the whole. So doing neighborhood plans, let's have targets for the neighborhood. looking at land use requirements, or in zoning, let's have targets for the different land uses. Let's have targets for parking lots. And so if it's in a sort of these bite-sized pieces, when planners are reviewing development applications, they have it on their agenda to look at, okay, does this meet the target for this particular piece of land? Strengthen policies and bylaws related to trees. I think that's kind of obvious based on what I've said. I think tree protection bylaws should be as strong as possible because, like I said, in some areas it's all we have. Tree planting incentives for private property owners, residents, which is fantastic. You guys can get these free tree vouchers. That's a great example of what can help to build awareness, and also lots of education is needed and informing people of the benefits. And then the city planting. And so look at all projects with a tree lens rather than just going straight to approval. And your role is to advocate, and it's wonderful that there are groups like you who are out there trying to spread this word. I wanted to end on a positive note, just with some examples of beautiful neighborhoods that achieve high densities, that can support affordable housing, that also have lots of trees. It's an example from Seattle on the right. The one on the left, I was in Washington, D.C. last year and took these photos just walking through different neighborhoods there. And we have Vancouver's West End as an incredible example of a very tree-covered, well, tree-healthy, tree-rich area of significant density as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine BERRIS, for walking us through and reminding us of the importance of having that healthy urban forest and tree canopy in every single neighborhood, and what we can do and what our municipal level governments and residents can do to advocate for that. I just also want to acknowledge some of the volunteers that put this together. There was a lot of people who worked really hard on this. I would like to say a huge thank you for everything from the baking, the venue, for putting all the pieces together today, to the city of Coquitlam for providing trees so that we can start to build that urban forest right here in our own backyard. And then also to our sponsors. So we mentioned Burke Mountain Naturalists, Protect Coquitlam's Urban Forest, Wondrous Tree Fellowship, and Nature Canada, all who provided funding and resources to go towards today's event. I'd like to thank the supporters. These are the faith-based and environmental groups who recognize that, we really do need to work together on these issues of social and environmental justice, that they're completely interconnected. St. Laurence Anglican Church, Como Lake United Church, Lodato Sea Circle in Port Moody, All Saints Roman Catholic Church, BC Nature, Metro Vancouver Alliance, Riverview Horticultural Center Society, Burquest Jewish Community Association, Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, and the Anglican Diocesan Justice and Peace Unit. So just to show that we're coming together. Also really like to thank the elected representatives that came out today to be with us. They're our voice, and we value and are very grateful for you all being here. To city staff that came out to help us with the trees, and also to all the participants. For our gratitude goes out to each and every one of you, because without you, this conversation can't happen. So thank you to everyone.